Hi, I'm Gerard Saylor from the LV Fargo Public Library in beautiful downtown Lake Mills, Wisconsin, currently being covered under more and more snow today. Here's two books you might be interested in. First up is Bill Mauldin, A Life Up Front by Todd DiPastino. Mauldin he won two Pulitzer Prizes, one when he was only about 20, 21 years old during World War II when he was a cartoonist, an incredibly popular cartoonist. Both the frontline troops, the rear echelon troops, and everybody at home, because he was really widely syndicated even when he was in the service. And he's famous for the Willie and Joe cartoons. Like here's kind of a sample there of the two characters. Two guys, two infantrymen in the front line who are always having to suffer under the front line and at the same time deal with pinheads in the rear ranks who are telling them to wear ties even while they're sitting in a ditch. Mauldin was incredibly popular with the frontline troops and incredibly popular at home, but a lot of officers and especially generals didn't like him because he was very truthful. He would have these crabby, complaining soldiers, and the generals didn't want to hear that. They wanted everything to be nice and clean. And he even was confronted by General Patton himself, who Patton didn't like him. And as Mauldin said, he never saw a stuffed shirt that he didn't want to poke, and that would have been Patton and quite a few other people. And so he was a real contrarian, a real individual. He grew up in rural New Mexico and rural Phoenix, Arizona, and a mentally ill mother, kind of a shiftless father, and he was a real self-starter. Any success that he had was due to his own hard work, real hard work. And he had some trouble after the war because he was so incredibly famous after being so widely syndicated for these Willie and Joe cartoons and winning a Pulitzer, and he was a true celebrity. That when he was still being widely syndicated after the war and after he was out of the service, he didn't want to do that anymore. He wanted to advance his career on and do different things. He wanted to talk about politics and current events and everything else that was going on. But his audience, they just wanted Willie and Joe, these two stock characters. And so Mauldin's popularity kind of went down, but then it kind of came up as he worked and worked and worked, and he became a columnist. He became a writer. He would go out as a correspondent. He went to Korea. He went to Vietnam, and he had that wartime experience, and he could really talk to the public and also to the soldiers about that, and truthfully say things that other people would miss or other people would kind of skip over. And he was a small guy. He was malnourished as a child, and he had these kind of big jug ears, you can't see it there, that would stick out. But he always had this kind of inner ferocity, I guess you would say. He could be a really aggressive guy. He didn't like bullies. He hated them. He didn't like people who would take advantage of other people. And that always really showed through in his work. And his philosophy about life and his comments about politics, and he was really heavy into Veterans Affairs and critical about Veterans Affairs, was really interesting. Really showed a different side to things, and a really interesting guy. Second up is a novel, Killing Floor by Lee Child. This is, I think, the third or fourth book in the Jack Reacher series, which is incredibly popular. There's about 10 books there, maybe less, maybe more. And chronologically, this is actually the first one in the series. Jack Reacher is an ex-military policeman, and he's just a drifter now. He has plenty of money sitting in the bank, but all he does is just go from town to town, wearing only the clothes on his back, maybe taking a toothbrush along, and he was a military brat, and he never really spent any time in the U.S. As a child, and then he went to West Point, and he was in the Army up until about his 30s, and he never actually spent any time in the United States, and so once he got out of the service, he decided, well, I'm just going to explore. And so that's what he's doing. He's going from town to town, and he gets in trouble, he causes trouble, things happen. And in Killing Floor, he's in rural Georgia in a diner having breakfast, enjoying his coffee, because if there's one thing Jack Reacher likes, is coffee. Smart man. And four uniformed cops bust in and hold shotguns on him and arrest him for the murder of a guy a few hours previously and a few miles up the road, who had his face shot off and then was kicked to a pulp after he was dead already. And Reacher will come into these towns or come into these situations, and there's always some kind of an elite person up at the top, and he's fighting against him. So it's really kind of formulaic novels, but they're always really good. Because it's all about Reacher and his personality and the way he deals things. I mean, he's really, really smart. He's really experienced. He's usually underestimated. He always finds a girl cop to have sex with. And at the end, he remorselessly will kill and beat up the opposition whatever happens. And like I said, these are really popular because of Reacher. They're popular with both men and women too. Reacher, I guess, is a pretty charismatic, attractive kind of guy. But these are really good. And if you want to start them in chronological order for the way the story goes, this is a good one to start with. But not necessarily. They're all standalone novels. I just picked this one out because it was on the shelf, and I read it. Actually, I've read 3 others. So, Killing Floor by Lee Child and Bill Mauldin, The Life Up Front. Mauldin died just a few years ago, and while he was on his deathbed in the hospital, there was a column written about him. And infantry veterans and Army veterans from around the country actually would travel to visit him in this hospital because he meant so much to them for the way he wrote and the things that he drew about during the war that really just kind of kept him going through some really bad times. Really hugely influential fellow. After Art Sailor, that's what to read. That's all.